Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and I am so excited to be celebrating 10 years of meaningful conversations with you. As we step into our new primetime hour, it's such an honor to share this exciting new chapter with you. So whether you're starting your day out, headed to work, or listening from wherever you are, this hour is designed to bring you thoughtful dialogue, fresh insight, and inspiring stories so you can make every moment count. So thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive in. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Connie McReynolds, who's here to share with us her book and work, Solving the ADHD Riddle, the real cause and lasting solutions to your child's struggle to learn. So what if the challenges often labeled as ADHD, anxiety, or behavioral problems were actually rooted in how the brain processes sound and visual information? I think this information is a real game changer, and we're going to take a deep dive into just this topic. Dr. Connie McReynolds is a licensed psychologist in California and a certified rehabilitation counselor and certified vocational evaluator. She's the founder of Morningstar Educational and Psychological Services, and for more than 35 years, she's been helping individuals improve how they function at school, at work, and in daily life. So welcome to the show, Dr. Connie McReynolds.
Thank you for having me.
My goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about not just your book, but the profound work that you're doing. What led you to discover this connection between auditory and visual processing, especially the difficulties and conditions such as ADHD, behavioral disorders, learning challenges, and anxiety?
Well, it is a little bit of a story, but I'll give the brief background of it. My mother taught second grade for 32 years in the same classroom. And so I think growing up in that, I just grew up in education. And there were children who struggled in her class. And I think I remember back on one in particular, a little boy who couldn't read. And she was quite concerned about him. And so over the summer, she took him with me in tow to a university teaching facility, and they were able to actually diagnose him at that time with dyslexia, which wasn't very well known, but it proved to be the underlying cause. He couldn't read because he, now I understand, had visual processing problems. And so many of these labels come about because we have symptoms or there's something that just isn't working. And with my background of the past 35 years, I've learned in psychology and rehabilitation counseling that these labels may get a person in the door for services, but what falls short is really, what do you do after that? And as I started developing my clinic at a university, it was actually a neurofeedback clinic where we began using EEG biofeedback. And what we started uncovering were these auditory and visual processing challenges that when we actually resolved those through the EEG biofeedback brain training process, usually about 20 hours of that brain training, then the children's symptoms, their behaviors, the difficulties seemed to be melting away. And parents were telling other parents and people were calling, and that's really how it all began, was just word of mouth. I had one person call and say, I don't know what you did to help my neighbor's little boy, but he's so much better now. And can you help my child? And it just was the slow discovery of how this all fit together. And it took about 5 years of really doing this work until I fully felt like, gosh, I think there is something really true to this. And we started working with veterans with PTSD, and we're still doing that 15 years later. And we've just helped countless people across the country to be able to first understand what this is. And then through the neurofeedback, we've been able to resolve it.
That is just so remarkable that you've come across this. I think it's a profound discovery for many parents, veterans, and for children to be able to feel like they can function in a way that supports them through their life?
It does make a difference for them. I've had parents so often say, we have an assessment that we run. It takes about 20 minutes actually to uncover these 37 areas of auditory and visual processing. And I've developed my own software data analysis program coupled with a strategic intervention plan unique to each person. When I go over these results with parents over the years, it has been just such a common theme that they have said that for the first time, they feel like someone really understands their child, what they as parents are going through. And this applies to adults as well. I've actually had a grown man who had lost many jobs come in one day and we did the computer-based assessment. I gave him the results and his memory, auditory memory, was really poor. And he said he was getting ready to lose his next job because his boss was so mad at him because he couldn't remember. And he felt like he must not be very smart. And I said, it's not intelligence. Your intelligence is fine. What's going on is your ability for your brain to process, hang on to, organize what your boss is telling you, and then be able to respond. So it was affecting his comprehension, but not from an intellectual standpoint, from a processing standpoint.
So, is that the root cause? Is the processing standpoint where people are then labeled that they have ADHD?
I truly believe it is. What I have learned over these 15 years is that it shows up, so these processing problems show up like lost productivity. They show up in school as academic failures, struggle at home. It affects self esteem, it affects confidence, creates these self limiting beliefs. It feeds anxiety and stress and depression. And when we can literally get underneath all of that, we just get to the root of all of that. We get rid of the labels. Let's not focus on the behaviors. The behaviors are just symptoms. And if we can learn to decode those behavioral communication points, particularly of children, we can literally get to the bottom of this, get to the root of what's going on. And these processing problems are absolutely, in my opinion, after 15 years of doing this, the root cause of so many diagnostic labels that are really given to parents regarding their child's behavior. And there's a host of them. I've had children come in with multiple diagnoses on multiple types of medications. And of course, they're still struggling because the medications don't really get to the root cause. They may resolve some of the symptoms of the behaviors, but you stop the medication, the behaviors come back, the symptoms come back, which is then the difficulty that parents and adults struggle with is how do I actually deal with these underlying problems? And we really have the solution to that. We've been doing this for a long time with a lot of people.
Now, I know we've been talking about ADHD, but how about ADD, anxiety, depression, learning problems, maybe focus problems? Does it work the same for those?
It actually does, because it took a while for me really to fully comprehend all of this. It really was the first 5 years of working with so many people, looking at the data, because we're all evidence-based driven with this, and coming to truly understand that what so many people are struggling with underneath all of these challenging labels is processing problems. If someone, for a child, for example, if a child is in a classroom and a teacher is repeating instructions, parents are repeating instructions, and still the child isn't following through, the default to that tends to be that the child is willfully misbehaving, they're inattentive, they're just not paying attention, they're drifting off, when in reality, that child has no capability at all to override this, and neither does an adult. And when we have these kinds of underlying processing problems, the anxiety, the social anxiety, the frustration, the internal dialogue becomes quite negative for most people. And we know that all that negative self talk really brings a person down, which can lead to some of the causes of depression. This gets to the bottom line of it, then, which helps us resolve that and give them a pathway forward.
So you mentioned biofeedback. So how does that work for people that are new to hearing that?
Mhm. So the neurofeedback is a form of biofeedback. It's an EEG form, which is similar to EKG sensors being placed for heart EKG. We use EEG neurofeedback, which uses sensors to measure brain waves, and it's a one-way system. So the brain waves are measured, it's fed into a computer, and then with specialized training programs based on the assessment results, we are able to train that brain through the concept of neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is really how our brain functions. It's how we learn anything. So we learn through repetition. We learn through these repeated actions. And when we reach a certain point, then it's called hardwired in. What happens with auditory and visual processing problems is that some of the neuronal pathways in the brain are just not as strong as they should be. When we use a brain training program like the one we have, we're able to systematically strengthen, just like going to the gym for your body. This functions as a gym for the brain by using repetition. And the repetition through 20 sessions then typically leads to strengthening those neuronal pathways. When those neuronal pathways have been strengthened sufficiently, the good news is you don't need to keep coming back to see us, unlike when we need to go to the gym to stay in shape. This tends to hold in the brain. And we know this because of the number of years we've been doing this, and clients writing back and saying, it's been 5 years since I've been there, and I just want to tell you, everything just keeps getting better and better. And it isn't unlike when we learn how to ride a bicycle when we're a child. We may not have been on a bicycle for years, but we can get back on that bicycle and still ride it because the brain has been trained. That pathway is still there. And that's all we're capitalizing on. And there are no side effects to this. There's nothing being administered to the person, to the child. We've worked with children as young as 3 to 5. Typically, they're like 5 to 6. And we've worked with people as old as 90 and every decade in between.
Oh my goodness. What a just a phenomenal discovery you've made. And so I've got so many questions for you. I think one is, why haven't we heard about this? Because I think the normal thing we hear about is the medication. We'll put them on all these meds and that will, quote, like manage things.
Mm.
I think everyone needs to know about this.
Well, it's part of why I wrote the book because I concur with that. And I think there are a lot of complicated reasons, some of which there's just, I'll be careful with how I say this because the medications, there's a lot of push for medications with our society as it is, believing that it's the solution. And when the parents come to me and the adults come to me, maybe they've tried the medications for their child. It hasn't worked. There are side effects to that. I'm clear about that in the book. It doesn't mean that some people don't benefit, but I can tell you the people who are showing up in my clinics are the ones who've been down that road or don't want to go down that road. And then there are a lot of societal beliefs around, traditional interventions. Well, the traditional interventions, if they worked, we wouldn't have millions of kids with ADHD struggling in school. If those worked, we wouldn't be where we are today. So we need a new solution. We need a new paradigm. And this is really about shifting the paradigm in schools, in homes, and in the community at large. It truly is a groundbreaking approach from the standpoint that the outcomes speak volumes. It's the results that we get that speak to the validity and the consistency of this intervention, as well as the profound positive results, the hope that it gives parents. So many people come in, even adults. We have so many adults who are now being diagnosed with ADHD. They don't want to go on the medications. They don't need the behavioral interventions. They need a solution. And I've often said, we are who you call after you get the diagnosis and ask, well, now what do? I have a diagnosis. and I don't know how to help my child, and I don't really want to be on the medication. That's where we come in. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here with you today to be able to share this with your listeners.
Well, I am just so honored that we get to have this discussion because I think it's just so profound that you've really uncovered this. Why do you think that? I don't even know if this is a question that you can answer. Why do you think that so many children are being diagnosed with ADHD and ADD and all these other problems? Is there some kind of deficiency?
Well, I don't know that it's a deficiency so much as it is the exposure to so many different stimuli. I'll put it that way. So when we think about the exposure, and again, we all live on our cell phones, we all are doing all of our, social media, all the news. But if we think about the level of exposure in the last 20 years compared to the prior 20 years, it's just an astronomical percentage of greater exposure. It tends to drive distractibility. Any of us know that on our phones, things can ping all day long. When children are exposed to that in early age, it actually disrupts some of the calming characteristics that children can have in them. There's a disruptive force to it. This isn't new news. They're the video games that are out there. I'm not against them. We use a type of video games, but they're low impact. The high impact video games, there has been research out there since 1999. Again, that's in my book, talking about what some of these video games are doing in the way it's literally training children's brains in ways that parents do not understand. And if they did understand it, they probably would be making different choices. But that information is not readily available to parents either. So we have a confounding factor of a lot of societal influences, this advent of technology, which we're on technology now, we can't live without it, nor would we really want to. We don't want to go back to the Stone Ages, but we don't have guardrails in place for children. And that's where some of the difficulty is coming in.
Just phenomenal. And what are some of the signs that parents and teachers should look for to indicate a child is experiencing an auditory or visual processing difficulty?
I really appreciate that question because that's really where it hits the road is understanding what this is. And there are some really key signs to what's happening with children. In the classroom, if a child is easily distracted, so let's say there's a lot of noise in the room, it's a difficult place for them to be. When someone's speaking to them, do they track or do they not track? Do they seem to tune out? Does their mind kind of wander and they're saying, get back, pay attention to me as the message is? Do they have difficulty really following any kind of a longer conversation? Do they have difficulty following verbal instructions? So do they kind of falter? Do they hesitate? One of the true measures of that is, are they able to really follow multi-step instructions? So in the morning, get your backpack, brush your teeth, and feed the dog, and all that happens is they're playing with the dog. And so it's a repeated process. So those are typical signs of auditory processing difficulties.
That is so good to know. And you mentioned that you also work with adults and veterans. So if
Mhm.
someone's having difficulty remembering or just being able to focus, what does it look like for adults? Is it different than children?
Not really, honestly. Adults have very similar symptoms. They may be able to mask them a little bit better than children do. Some people have become very adept at trying to cover up these areas that they perceive are intelligence limitations. But if they are in like a staff meeting and multiple people are speaking, do they find that they can't track on what they're supposed to be paying attention to? Do they feel like when their supervisor comes to them and gives them verbal instructions, do they catch it or do they find out later they missed some major steps? And then, of course, they're perceived as not doing their job diligently. The cost for employees is enormous. I had a veteran I was working with a while back who came to me, and she was describing all of these difficulties she was having at work. She was on her second performance improvement plan. She was getting rather desperate, and it occurred to me that we needed to do this assessment with her. When we did that, it turned out, oh my goodness, this woman did not have auditory processing capabilities, and she was working in a call center where her entire role was to do nothing but process phone calls coming in, and she could not remember what people were saying to her. Her employer was just completely frustrated with her. And sadly, they were so far along on that second performance improvement plan that we couldn't get these accommodations in place in time before they let her go. That's the cost of this for adults. They're losing jobs and they're quite capable, but they don't know they're capable. They equate this to intelligence, using similarly bad language that children do. Children will say, I'm not very smart, I'm stupid, I can't figure this out. It doesn't have anything to do with that. And this is why this is such a critical, I think, time frame for us with children. And I'll speak just a little bit to the visual, because this is important in today's world, particularly after we've come out of the pandemic and all of the online coursework that was required for children. There were so many children who had visual processing problems. They can't track on visual information on a screen. They can't follow along because their brain just will not process this. They get distracted. They lose track of what they're supposed to be focusing on. And none of this is about vision or hearing. It's really important to understand. They simply cannot comprehend through a processing limitation what they are supposed to do. And they will drift off and tune out and just quit. They give up because they are so overpowered by these online formats that they can't function. And so then they get labeled, and there goes kind of the whole trajectory. I mean, this is really, I don't think that, in my opinion, obviously, I've been living with this for about 15 years, but I don't think we could have anything more important that we could be doing right now for today's children in the classrooms and even today's workers by understanding these auditory and visual processing problems, and then realizing that there is a solution to this. You have to know what you're dealing with. Without these understandings of the 37 areas that we look at, I equate it with putting a little mask on and spinning around and trying to hit a piñata to try and create a treatment plan. For people who have auditory processing problems, talk therapy likely is not going to work. We've learned that with veterans with PTSD, that the traumatizing effect of talk therapy can aggravate conditions. And if that's coupled with auditory processing problems, they're not able to track and they become more agitated and more frustrated. With children who have behavioral problems, many times these behavioral interventions are not working. Not because they aren't good interventions, but if it doesn't land, it isn't going to work. So if a child cannot interpret, organize it, and respond in an expected manner, it's perceived that the child isn't following through. It's perceived that someone's letting the child down or the child is willfully not participating. And I'm here to tell you it isn't any of those things. That just simply isn't true.
I think for a lot of people and parents, this is so encouraging to hear that there's another approach that people can take when they're doing appointments. I know everyone's different. Is there like a range of appointments that tend to have better benefit than others?
Well, there's kind of a two-stage process that people can go through. What I've created is a Clarity Essentials process, which takes out this assessment piece on the front end. So we can do that with anyone. It takes about 2 hours to do that. That piece is being used in schools. I consult on IEP and 504 plans, provide this assessment, boil down these findings, break it into auditory and visual limitations, and then provide the schools with strategies that are immediately implementable in the classroom. And the IEP teams have remarked at just how useful this is for them because they can take it straight in to the classroom. The neurofeedback piece takes a little bit longer, but it actually resolves those neuronal pathway. It takes about 20 hours of brain training. We usually do 30-minute segments twice a week. We do that in 20 sections, and then we reassess for progress toward the goal. Some children have a lot more findings than others. Some can get done within 10 hours, some 20, and some may need a little bit more depending upon the severity of those processing difficulties.
Is it about the same for adults as well?
Yes, it is. That's what's so interesting is that most adults, it takes about the same amount of time. The children settle into it quicker than the adults do. The adults want to overthink everything. They want to try and think their way through it. And we just have to let the brain learn, which is how we learn how to ride a bike. We can talk about riding a bike, show people how to ride a bike, but to learn how to ride a bike, you have to get on it and learn how to balance. And your brain figures out the neurofeedback in the same manner. So we have capability of doing this regardless of where people are sitting. With the remote services we have, we can work with people and we're able to really help get this resolved for them.
So I'd like to pivot and talk about your Clarity Essentials process. Can you explain what that is and how that works?
Yes, thank you for that. It is actually the front load of the neurofeedback program because what I started recognizing a few years back is that we really needed to pull this data set immediately and have something that people can walk out the door with and implement when they get home. And that's what this does. So we take the same assessments that we have always done prior to the neurofeedback and offer that just as a standalone option for folks. That comes with a full report. And again, the report, the whole thing, it takes about 2 hours for us to do that for folks. And in that report, there are 37 areas that we're assessing. There's a ranking on percentile rankings from 1 to 99 of where they're falling in functionality on those areas. And then any of the areas that fall, and color coded it, so the greens and the golds, everything's working well. The orange and the red areas are where there's significant limitations. Those significant limitations then come with strategies for each one of those applicable to a specific age group, so it's age appropriate, and it's tied specifically to the uniqueness of that particular person's learning profile and areas of weakness. And then they can walk in the door at work and use that. They've used this for reasonable accommodation letters to schools. I write those. I write these for work adaptations as well. And we do this for veterans. So we are working with a number of veterans in the area. We have a contract with them to do neurofeedback and therapy to help mitigate a lot of the difficulties that our veterans are struggling with as well.
It sounds like the Clarity Essentials process helps identify the learning and processing challenges, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yes, that's correct. So the assessment is looking at those 37 areas. And what I've done is just pull that out of the full neurofeedback intervention plan. It's the front end assessment. So we're looking at those 37 areas of auditory and visual processing. We're looking at memory, conceptualization, and sequencing. All of that information is pulled together in a report that is about somewhere to 8 to 10 pages, I think, in length. Each one of those areas is identified by name. There's a discussion point and a strategy and intervention that people can just literally walk into their employer with or walk into the school and request the accommodations because they're specific to each one. So, for example, auditory stamina is one of the areas that we assess. And this is the ability to hang on to information to the end of a conversation. A lot of people are going to run out of steam before they get there. And if they know that and can learn about that, then they can ask for strategies for information to be delivered in smaller chunks or followed up with written information. Processing speed is an important one for parents to understand. It's really important for the special education world because processing speed is actually, I think, completely misidentified in the schools from the standpoint that this ends up being identified as cognitive, intellectual delays, processing delays to where children are being channeled into special education services when it is actually not tied to any kind of intellectual disability. Well, imagine if a parent is questioning whether or not a child should be placed over in special education and then can walk in the door with, in fact, that this is processing speed, meaning the rate of delivery and the rate of uptake or landing for a child is different. The child can't keep up with the information being presented, whether it's auditory or visual. So all of these pieces are carved out on the front end with this assessment process. And within a 2-hour time frame, you can have the answers that you've probably been looking for a very long time.
That is just so remarkable to have those kind of answers available. And it allows people then to start working on the different areas that they need help in.
Correct. That's the key, is that it provides hope, it provides guidance, it's a pathway that they can take. And in many instances, this is all they need. They just want this. They don't want to go on with the neurofeedback. Some people will say, we get this. We're asking for those accommodations right now. We're implementing them at home. We would also really like to get at this and resolve this for a child so that they can go on and have a wonderful life. And adults will sometimes opt for that as well.
That's so remarkable. And having this information available for schools and teachers, does that also help them then to better guide the parents and children and what's going on?
It absolutely does. I've sit in on a number of IEP meetings, which are independent educational plans for children who are struggling in school. And the one I sat in most recently, I was providing this information, and the head of the IEP team just remarked, she said, "Can you please just send us this document?" She said, "We can walk into the classroom this afternoon and the teachers can start changing up how they're interacting with this child." And they were so appreciative of this because it was actionable, it was immediate. They could literally change up what they were doing because this child had auditory processing problems. And really, all they needed to do was to start providing backup visually because this child had good visual processing capabilities, so they could default. And so the opposite is true. If good visual, poor auditory, don't give a lot of auditory instructions. If a child cannot remember what's being said, repeating it 5 times isn't going to make it land. It will not land. It has to be provided in a different format. But if you don't know what you were looking at, it's really hard for teachers or parents to figure out how to communicate with their child and help the information land so the child can be successful.
So, having this information, has it helped to also reduce the frustration and maybe some of the behavioral challenges in children?
It absolutely changes everything. It changes it at home because so many times there's so much frustration within families when they feel like their child is just willfully not following along. When they recognize that this is actually a processing problem that this child has no ability to override, I have parents break down in the conference room when I'm delivering this information. It's overpowering for them because suddenly they feel like, my gosh, I have an answer. And oh my gosh, what have I been doing? I had no idea. And the response to that is always the same: you can't know until you know. Now you do, and now you can move forward. Now the world can change for you at home, for your child at home, and for your child at school. And getting teachers on board with this is a really crucial step as well. Teachers are severely overtaxed. I was a teacher for 25 years in academia. People are just struggling in the classroom. Everyone is overloaded. And imagine if we can just simply give teachers these compensation type strategies that they can implement right away and get rid of some of the frustration, and just the sorrow that these children are experiencing, and the teachers as well.
I just love the work that you do because it's really removing these hidden barriers and putting things out where people can understand them. There's actionable tools that can be used. I'm sure you're probably booked like no tomorrow with people wanting adults and children to really kind of refocus their whole lives.
Yes, there's a lot of interest in this. And my goal, though, is really to get the information out. If we can be of assistance, we want to. I have 2 in-person clinics, and a lot of this we can actually do remotely. The in-person clinics are located in Redlands and Rancho Cucamonga. And then up on my website, it's ConnieMcReynolds.com is the one about neurofeedback. The website ClarityEssential.com is the one where you can learn about this excerpted service that we provide, which is the assessment piece that's geared toward just immediate understanding of what's going on. And it's literally in 2 hours, you're walking away with answers and strategies.
And of course, your book, Solving the ADHD Riddle, is a great place, I think, for people to start to really dive into this. My goodness, you're such an inspiration. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Connie McReynolds. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your work and book, Solving the ADHD Riddle. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.